Tonight, the biggest child abuse trial in French history, due to begin next week. Nearly 300 survivors, many raped or assaulted while under anaesthetic, after their abuser was allowed to offend for decades.
I think this man is a predator. He's a predator of children. He destroyed my life and destroyed the lives of so many children.
Also coming up, Moscow dismisses Europe's plan for peace as two of the continent's leaders prepare for face-to-face talks with Donald Trump. But tensions are simmering between Ukraine and the United States. Today, a meeting in Kiev and a cancelled news conference. Plus, Hamas is condemned as it hands over the bodies of 4 Israelis, including the youngest hostage and one of the oldest hostages kidnapped on October the 7th. And in Egypt, a remarkable discovery as archaeologists find the first pharaoh's tomb for more than a century. Good evening. We begin the programme tonight with the case of possibly one of the most prolific child abusers in Europe. The details are distressing. French surgeon Joel Lescarbach assaulted hundreds of young patients over 3 decades, using his workplace as his hunting ground. He targeted some of his victims when they were under anaesthetic in the post-surgery recovery room and as they recovered in their hospital beds. Every year in his diary he wrote, "I am a paedophile and I'm proud of it." But yet he was allowed to work with children, even after he was convicted for viewing child pornography, even after his colleagues repeatedly complained. Tonight, we'll hear from the families still living with the scars and ask why the doctor was allowed to prey on children for so long. A warning, this special report from our Europe correspondent, Adam Parsons, contains descriptions of sexual abuse and references to suicide.
Adorable.
For Roland and Morissette, grief and anger are entwined with their pursuit of justice. Their grandson Matisse was just a little boy, 10 years old, when he was taken to hospital with stomach pains. The family was met by this man, a doctor, Joel Lescarbach, now accused of being the worst child abuser in French history, often assaulting children as they were under anaesthetic.
He told us that they needed to keep Matisse under observation in hospital overnight, and that if anything urgent happened, we would be alerted.
Lescarbach told the family to leave Matisse in his care and to go home. That night, he allegedly abused the boy as he lay in bed. His grandparents still have the discharge paper signed by Lescarbach. He is accused of assaulting and often raping 299 people, mostly children, over the course of 25 years. It's claimed he wrote down the details of all these crimes in diaries later found at his house. Many victims were unaware they'd been attacked until told by the police years later.
There was a knock at the door. Mathis was alone. He'd already started using drugs, so initially he thought he might be in trouble. But when they left having told him, and they shut that door, Mathis was alone again, and I think it was at that moment that his world came crashing in around him, and he had flashbacks.
Matisse changed. Roland says these are the before and after photos. A happy child who then turned in on himself. The trauma was too much for Matisse. Addled with addictions, he took his own life in 2021, aged 24. Lescarbach had worked at more than a dozen hospitals, mostly in Brittany. The average age of his alleged victims was just 11. Every year, Lescarbach would write in his diary the words, "I am a paedophile and I'm proud of it." He was finally caught in 2017 when the 6-year-old daughter of his neighbours said he'd sexually assaulted her while she was in the back garden. This is the house where Joel Lescarbach lived in Jonzac. When police went inside, what they discovered were child-sized dolls, some of them chained up, hundreds of thousands of indecent images, and also diaries and notebooks where he'd recorded his own acts of abuse. This woman was one of his victims. She was just 10 when she was allegedly raped by the surgeon. Marie, that isn't her real name, was treated by Le Squanec in a hospital in Vannes for acute appendicitis.
When I heard that I was among the alleged victims, I told myself, that's the missing jigsaw piece to my life. He took my childhood, my life as a woman. I don't have a normal life today like everyone else. I was shocked. I couldn't understand it. But then I began to make a connection between this and many of the problems I'd experienced, especially regarding my issue with intimacy and relationships with men.
Marie is now a mother with 3 children of her own. She says she's not scared of facing Le Squanec in court.
I try to find words without anger. I think this man is a predator. He's a predator of children. He destroyed my life and destroyed the lives of so many children. And this man's place is in prison, and he needs to stay there. He's dangerous. He cannot be allowed to touch or be near any children.
Le Squanec is already in prison, convicted in 2020 of raping 4 young girls, including 2 of his own nieces. But he could have been stopped so much sooner. Nearly 20 years ago, a tip-off from the FBI led to him being convicted of sharing and downloading child pornography, but he only got a suspended sentence. A doctor from this hospital in Campale raised his fears, querying how Le Squanec could be allowed to treat children. But a medical tribunal kept him on, a decision that allowed him to continue abusing children.
It's unacceptable that this man was given 30 years of immunity and behaved like a serial killer, amassing a huge number of victims, using his place of work as a hunting ground.
Do you think he's a monster?
Is he a monster? Yes, we can call him that, but it's an understatement. He is a man who 24/7 has just one thing on his mind, and that is abusing young children.
Le Squanec will go on trial in Vannes, but the courtroom here is far too small for everyone who needs to attend. Instead, a converted university building. There's a space for all 299 of the alleged victims to watch on a big screen at what will be France's and possibly Europe's biggest ever child abuse trial. And there may be yet more victims. Some of Le Squanec's diaries disappeared. For the 4 months of this trial, he will answer for the deeds of his past. The people allegedly abused by a surgeon when they were small children, now returning as adults to confront him in court. Adam Parsons, Sky News, Vannes in Brittany.
Well, joining me now is Frédéric Benoit, a lawyer for the French charity The Child's Voice. Thank you very much for speaking to us. Is it fair to say that France is still reeling from the Gisèle Pelicot case and now to be presented with what might be the most prolific child abuser in the country's history?
It is fair to present the 2 cases, even though they are very different. As far as the Le Squanec case is concerned, I represent the association La Voix de l'Enfant, the voice of the child, and we act as some kind of whistleblowers. Why? Because this case illustrates 2 main topics. First, the dramatic consequences of families remaining silent in the face of pedophile and incestuous behaviors. Secondly, a chain of institutional dysfunctions concerning, firstly, the way the police acted in 2004, when, as you just reported, the FBI signaled that Le Squanec and other French citizens were consulting pedophile sites coming from Russia. Secondly, the judicial handling of the case in 2005. And thirdly, the responsibility of the health authorities in France. Those three causes allowed Le Squarnec to act, to pursue his criminal activities for so many years. We are talking about 30 years.
What evidence do you have to back those claims up?
As far as the police is concerned, you just reported that in 2004, the FBI signaled that there were 2,600 people in France who consulted these pedophile sites, and 3 were reported in Brittany. Le Squarnec was a surgeon, gastric surgeon, a dentist, and a retired employee from the post administration. Normally, in this type of situation, the police arrives at the suspect home at 6 o'clock in the morning, obviously without informing him, and immediately carry out a search. This is what happened for the employee of the post administration. And of course, the police found everything in his house. Unfortunately, in the case of Mr. Squarnec, and very probably, given his social status, a well-known surgeon in a small Brittany town, the police did not want to proceed in this way. They first summoned him to their offices with a false pretext of a hit and run. Le Squarnec is very intelligent. He knew perfectly well that there was no subject of hit and run. He knew perfectly well that he was summoned to the premises of the police because they were inquiring on his pedophile activities.
So are you saying, sorry to interrupt, but just want to establish, are you saying that because of his status, because of the fact that he was a surgeon, that justice wasn't served properly because of that?
The police, to my opinion, did not act correctly, or did not act as they should have done, and as they do very often in pedophile cases. And to my opinion, yes, it's because of his status, a well-known surgeon in a small Britain town. And
just finally, because we are running out of time, I'm so sorry, but you will be attending court every day. You'll be at the trial. What will your role be there?
My role will be to alert on these different institutional dysfunction. Firstly, the police, then the fact that the court in Vannes in 2004 did not prescribe any obligation of care or any medical or judicial follow-up. And again, no preventive measures were taken by the health authorities here in France. You just reported that, or the woman who was interviewed in your last show said there was no way this man should have been in contact with children. And of course, the health authorities here in France allowed him to be in contact with young children, even though they knew that he had consulted during 2 years pedophile internet sites.
Frédéric Benoit, thank you very much for speaking to us, a lawyer for the French charity The Child's Voice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, if you've been affected by that report, support is available 24 hours a day through the Samaritans. You can call 116 123 or email joe@samaritans.org. Now, it may not feel like it, but today marks 1 month since Donald Trump entered the White House for a second time. We have said it a lot on the programme, but he has upended America's foreign policy and its approach to the war in Gaza and in Ukraine. Last night, he doubled down on the description of his Ukrainian counterpart, as a dictator. Tonight, the White House urged Zelenskyy to tone down his criticism and sign a controversial deal to give the US access to Ukraine's critical minerals. We'll hear from the President Trump's national security advisor in a moment, after this report from our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes.
Mr. President.
The day after the US president called him a dictator, Volodymyr Zelenskyy hosted Donald Trump's envoy to Ukraine. Cameras captured the encounter, but no questions allowed, apparently at the request of the American side.
The meeting is taking place right now behind those closed doors. Originally, the President and Keith Kellogg were going to be making a statement, but that got cancelled. We've been told, though, that Volodymyr Zelenskyy is motivated. He has a fighting spirit, despite all this language from Washington. There is the concern, though, that maybe he's not talking to the man in the heart of the Trump circle, that maybe Keith Kellogg is actually a bit sidelined.
The language from Washington is increasingly hostile to Ukraine and friendly towards Russia. A top security official dodged a question on whether Mr. Trump also thinks Vladimir Putin is a dictator, and instead criticised Kyiv for rejecting a US proposal to access its natural resources.
President Trump is obviously very frustrated right now with President Zelenskyy. The fact that that he hasn't come to the table, that he hasn't been willing to take this opportunity that we have offered. I think he eventually will get to that point, and I hope so very quickly.
With the US no longer a reliable partner, Ukraine needs Europe to step up. Here, NATO soldiers training in Romania. Western officials say British and other European troops could be deployed to Ukraine as part of what's being called a reassurance force following any ceasefire deal with Russia. But the very idea prompted an outcry from the Kremlin.
Of course, the deployment of military contingents from countries that are NATO members on the territory of Ukraine is not acceptable to us.
With the war still raging and so many false claims coming from the White House, we return to one of the towns that Russia first targeted. This memorial in Bucha, a permanent tribute to the victims of a month of Russian terror.
This is the reality of Russia's war. Hundreds of people killed, an entire community terrorised. No one here in Bucha believes anyone other than Moscow was to blame for their suffering. Yes, they're rebuilding their lives now, but as one woman asked me, who is going to mend our souls?
Olena lived through that hell. She was shocked to hear the US president recently suggest Ukraine had started the war.
He's dishonest. He calls our president a clown. But honestly, you'd have to search far and wide to find a bigger clown than Trump. A circus act. That's what he is.
But no one is laughing here. Deborah Haynes, Sky News, Bucha, Ukraine.
Just to let you know that Donald Trump is speaking at the White House at a Black History Month event at the moment. We'll go live to that event when he addresses the war in Ukraine. Until then, we've been hearing a lot about Donald Trump's frustration with Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Have a listen to what his national security advisor, Mike Waltz, had to say at today's White House press briefing.
President Trump is obviously very frustrated right now with President Zelenskyy. The fact that that he hasn't come to the table, that he hasn't been willing to take this opportunity that we have offered. I think he eventually will get to that point, and I hope so very quickly. But President Trump, as we made clear to our Russian counterparts, and I want to make clear today, he's focused on stopping the fighting and moving forward. And we could argue all day long about what's happened in the past.
David Blevins is in Washington, D.C. for us tonight. And David, some evidence today of the frustration in Washington at Zelenskyy's defiance.
Yes, Gillian, frustration, but also some unexpected optimism. And that really is a surprise given the fallout after President Trump's comments about President Zelenskyy just 24 hours ago. We have heard from Vice President J.D. Vance. He addressed a Conservative conference here in Washington this morning and told people they were on the cusp of peace in Europe because Donald Trump is a most effective negotiator. He described him that way because he said everything is on the table when he begins the negotiation. Of course, course, what is on the table right now is what President Zelenskyy of Ukraine is rejecting, and that is the suggestion that the US should have access to $500 billion of natural Ukraine reserves as payback for Washington's investment in Ukraine's defence during this war. But later this evening then, President Zelenskyy did post online that Ukraine stood ready for a strong, effective security and investment agreement with Donald Trump. So that suggests something has shifted. Now, we haven't heard from Keith Kellogg, the President's envoy to Ukraine. That press conference was cancelled, as you heard in Deborah's report. But we have heard from Steve Witkoff. We're more familiar with him as a Middle East envoy, but he's also been operating as the President's envoy to Moscow. And my colleague Mark Stone caught up with him in Miami. He said, don't underestimate Donald Trump's ability to bring people together.
Do you think that Volodymyr Zelenskyy is a dictator?
Gosh, you've been biting me right on. Look, I think I agree with President Trump. He's got a very, very keen sense of what has to be done to create a lasting peace between Russia and Ukraine. And I follow his lead, and I believe in what he's got to say.
But how does calling an ally like Ukraine and the leader of that ally, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, a dictator, how does that further the peace that you're trying to find?
I think it brings everything. The president has an uncanny ability of knowing how to bring people together, and this is the beginning of that.
He's sent Europe into a tailspin at the moment.
So, David, we know that Sir Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron will be travelling to Washington next week. What will they be aiming for in those talks? Much pressure on them.
Yes, President Macron has been taking part in a conference online today. He said he wanted the US president to take a tough line with Vladimir Putin in the negotiations. Of course, we know Sir Keir Starmer has already rode in hard beside President Zelenskyy and shown his solidarity with the Ukrainian leader. But it may be less about what they want from President Trump and more about what he wants from them next week. The White House has welcomed the British Prime Minister's suggestion of British troops participating in some kind of peacekeeping force on the ground in Ukraine. President Macron says there won't be French troops there tomorrow, but he is open to the idea. So it is going to be a critical week next week when both the French President and the British Prime Minister visit the White House. And of course, we're not in the realms of traditional diplomacy, because I think it's fair to say the plates have significantly shifted in the first month of this administration.
Indeed. David, thank you very much. David Blevins in Washington for us there. And as I say, we might return to America and see Donald Trump hosting that Black History Month event. In the meantime, Russia may already have rejected Europe's peace plan out of hand, but two European leaders, Emmanuel Macron and Sir Keir Starmer, as we've heard, will be heading to Washington next week to lay out their proposals. It's likely to include troops being sent to Ukraine. To Ukraine as peacekeepers if and when the fighting ends. Here's our correspondent, Gurpreet Narwan, on what officials say that force might look like.
We don't know what peace in Russia and Ukraine would look like, but we do know that the onus would fall on Europe to maintain it. This is Ukraine's front line with Russia. It's 640 miles long. The shaded red, that's territory Russia has taken from Ukraine over the past decade. President Zelenskyy says 110,000 troops would be needed for any peacekeeping force to be effective. And European military chiefs are prepared to send personnel, but the number in question are far smaller, under 30,000. And crucially, those soldiers would not be posted close to frontline areas in the east of Ukraine, out of concern they could be attacked by Russia. Instead, this is being described as a reassurance force to support the return of Ukrainians to the country and to protect critical infrastructure. Troops would be sent to major cities, ports and nuclear power plants, which could prevent attacks like this one on the Chernobyl power plant last week. Satellites, spy planes and drones could also help in the effort. Fast jets would protect Ukrainian airspace and allow commercial flights to resume. And warships could be sent to the Black Sea to remove Russian mines. So there's more to this than the number of boots on the ground. But Zelenskyy has been clear. he wants more of them too. So how much could European countries send? Well, the British Army has around 75,000 regular full-time soldiers, the French 114,000 and Germany 60,000. Although only a fraction would ever be sent, in the UK, defence sources say we could be looking at just 5,000. And then there's the US, whose army dwarfs ours. So Keir Starmer has said the plan would only work with the US backstop, but the Americans have definitively ruled out sending troops. And whatever the plan, the rules of engagement will be vital.
All peacekeeping operations need the consent of the warring parties, the antagonists, for peacekeepers to be on their territory. One presumes within this operation that the consent of Ukraine would be there, but would we have the consent of the Russian forces?
For its part, Russia has said the presence of European or NATO forces in Ukraine as part of a peace deal would be unacceptable. So this is still very delicate and far from a done deal.
Thousands of Ukrainian refugees travelled to the UK after Russia's invasion. Tonight, some of them gathered to mark the 3rd anniversary of the start of the war. Well, this week marks 11 years since Russia annexed Crimea from Ukraine and 3 years since its full-scale invasion. So how do Ukrainians here feel about the peace deal being proposed and the prospect of returning home? We've been hearing from them at a special service held earlier this evening.
I was really disappointed, what I can say, because America gave a lot of support for Ukraine, and it's like our friend, but now I don't know, it's friends, or now it's looking like they're going to be friends with Russia, and I didn't expect like it can be like this.
Maybe all Ukrainian people don't feel support of America because it's a very bad joke or bad decision to do everything that Trump does made us, for Ukrainian, because a lot of Ukrainian people believed that when Trump will president, he will support Ukraine.
If U.S. is stepping back, it makes me really lose trust in whatever is said by the big leaders of the countries.
You're watching The World with me, Gillian Joseph. Still to come, UN condemnation and vows of revenge from Israel after Hamas parades the coffins of hostages' remains before handing them over. And later, how this ancient paint job helped solve a mystery dating back millennia in Egypt.
Once almost lost, these denizens of the deep are back.
The problem for these whales is global warming. Water temperatures are rising.
We're worried that the animals are actually starting to starve.
Deadly and outdated. What do you think should happen to the net?
I would like to see them go.
I'm Nicole Johnston, Sky's Asia correspondent, based here in Beijing.
A towering monument to the China dream and its demise.
From one end of this country to the other, China is littered with real estate that's falling apart.
China is facing a tsunami of the elderly.
We have to work as long as health allows, otherwise, no money.
China is under pressure to pay for the pensions of 500 million retirees. I've reported on a wide range of stories from around the world.
Mass protests forced the president to flee.
The sight of the president's private swimming pool only reinforces to Sri Lankans the great divide here between rich and poor.
Aid groups say Gaza is now the world's most dangerous place to be a child.
The Israeli army has raided towns and villages all over the West Bank.
These tunnels run all over Gaza. The Gaza Strip is ridden with them. A referendum designed to unite the country has only deepened its divide.
Sydney's floodplains underwater again.
This is the third or fourth time in the 18 months that their homes have gone under. Sky News, the full story first. It may seem like a gimmicky toy, but it is part of the global race between the United States and China for new technology. This elite engineering designed to humour and to help us.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Sky News, the full story first.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised.
If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Just want to bring you some breaking news now from Israel, where police say there's been a series of explosions on buses near Tel Aviv from 5 timed explosives. No injuries have been reported. Authorities say devices in 2 other buses failed to explode in what they're describing as a suspected terror attack. Footage on social media shows at least 1 bus on fire in a parking lot, with a large plume of smoke rising above. After the incidents, the Israeli Defence Minister said he's instructed the military to increase the intensity of activity in refugee camps in the West Bank. They had become a symbol for Israelis of Hamas's brutality. A mother, her baby and toddler, and an elderly peace activist who were amongst those taken hostage during October the 7th attacks. Today, Hamas said it handed back their remains, parading the 4 coffins in a staged event labelled inhumane by the UN. The militants say the hostages were killed by Israeli airstrikes, a claim rejected by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who's vowed revenge. Our international correspondent, Diana Magnay, reports from Jerusalem.
A sombre and hugely painful day for Israel, as the bodies of 4 hostages who died in Hamas captivity are brought home. Police special forces saluting the convoy as it passed, en route to Tel Aviv for final forensic checks. But Israelis know whose bodies these are. Images of 83-year-old Oded Lifshitz and the Bibas family beamed out over Hostage Square. Ariel and Kafir Bibas and their mother Shiri, Kafir just 8 months old when they were taken, symbols of the horror of October the 7th. Oded Lifshitz, one of the oldest to be taken hostage, a veteran peace activist who had long campaigned for Palestinian rights. Israelis lining the way to pay their respects.
The farewell from the Bibas family and Oded Lifshitz, who just passed by. It's not easy. It's not easy. It's very sad. And it's only the beginning for the sad things that will come.
The UN human rights chief condemned Hamas for this ceremony, calling the parading of bodies abhorrent and cruel. Hamas using the moment to send its own message that these 4 were killed by Israeli airstrikes, a claim impossible to verify. About the 17,000 Palestinian children it says have been killed in this war. But it was Hamas who attacked on October the 7th. And Israel's Prime Minister is bent on vengeance still.
The voices of our loved ones cry out to us from the earth. They demand that we settle accounts with the vile murderers.
That's as may be. For now, though, this is a moment to remember the innocence of the Bibas boys, the anguish of their mother, and the gentle activism of Oded Lifshitz, who devoted his life to a just peace. Diana Magnay, Sky News, Jerusalem.
You remember Donald Trump's promise to turn Gaza into the Riviera of the Middle East. That theme, comparing the Strip to prime real estate, began with his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, about a year ago. You heard Mark Stone chatting to Steve Witkoff earlier at the CPAC conference, a gathering for conservatives all over the world. He's also been catching up with Jared Kushner and asked him about the future of Gaza and Palestinians there. Have a listen.
One thing that seemed to be missing was the sort of history, the Palestinian history to the right to return if they want to. Do you think that they have that right?
There should be peace. There should be peace, and they should get leadership that actually will help them make peace instead of putting them in suffering.
But if they want to return to their homeland and not repeat the Nakba of years gone by, is that okay in your mind, in President Trump's mind?
Look, I think they need leadership that's not going to attack their neighbors, and that's going to give them a better life.
Just want to show you now these images of the aftermath of that Israeli bus explosion in Bat Yam city, south of Tel Aviv. We broke that story a few moments ago. Authorities say that no one has been harmed. No injuries reported at the moment, but that's the very latest from that scene near Tel Aviv, where there have been bus explosions. No one harmed. This is The World with me, Gillian Joseph. Next up, guilty of sexual assault. The court ruling against Spain's former football chief for kissing player Jenny Hermosa without consent.
saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free wherever you get your news. The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
Welcome back. Now, Donald Trump has finished speaking at that Black History event at the White House. He didn't address the growing tensions with Ukraine or the peace plan being proposed by Europe. He did have a message, however, for black voters. Let's listen in.
But that's all changed, and we got the highest vote, and one of the big reasons I'm president today is because of the black vote, and I always appreciate it. So this is a very special time. It's Black History Month. We love you all. We're going to work with you. We're going to make America greater than ever before. We're going to do it together. And I want to thank you all for being here. It's an incredible honor. And to my great golfing friends, I want to thank them in particular because they really are. They make a lot of money. They don't have to be up here with me. Tiger doesn't have to be here. Adam doesn't have to. They don't need this. But they love you and they love our country. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Donald Trump speaking there at the Black History Month event he hosted at the White House. Spain's former football chief, Luis Rubiales, has been found guilty of sexual assault for kissing player Jenny Hermoso without her consent. It happened during a ceremony crowning the Spanish team for their 2023 World Cup victory. A statement from Ms. Hermoso's lawyer welcomed the conviction, which Rubiales plans to appeal. Here's our sports correspondent, Rob Harris.
This is the World Cup euphoria that became court evidence. Spain's triumph tarnished by an abuse of power with the world watching live. Starting a fight for justice by star forward Jenny Hermoso. A judge now ruling there was no consent for the kiss forced on her by then Spanish Football Federation President Luis Rubiales. And we aren't showing the moment of the sexual assault in the medal ceremony that Rubiales has now been convicted of. But spared jail, only fined €10,000. And following last week's testimony, acquitted of coercing Hermoso into publicly exonerating him in the days after beating England in Sydney, leaving Hermoso's teammates questioning the judge.
I think the conviction for sexual assault is correct. What I find somewhat striking and seems strange to me is that there is no conviction for coercion. It sums up the feeling of resentment in the dressing room.
Rubiales did everything to distract from the team's heroic homecoming in August 2023, defiantly clinging to power before being banned by FIFA, and denigrating Hermoso. But his hostility galvanised a wider It's Over movement across Spain against sexism and inequalities.
I think it is a step forward and a ruling that makes it clear that our law is a good law. It is a law that protects women and that consent is at the centre of a relationship. When there is consent, there is a consensual relationship. When there is no consent, as a ruling says, there is assault.
It's seen as a landmark conviction in Spain, even the most powerful being prosecuted for acts of sexual aggression. Victims believed, not doubted. Rob Harris, Sky News.
This is The World with me, Gillian Joseph. Next up, news that's left some James Bond fans shaken and stirred. What does a studio deal mean for the franchise's future?
Sunday, the Premier League is exclusively on Peacock. The league's most dynamic scorers square off. Goal for Haaland! Erling Haaland and Man City. Mo Salah and Liverpool. This is the Premier League. That's just stunning. Sunday, only on Peacock.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's Senior Ireland Correspondent. It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
If there's anyone who might know how to fix Northern Ireland's devolved government, it's the American architect.
Changes in circumstance require changes in approach.
The end of the political stalemate, the start of a new chapter for Northern Ireland.
I confirm that I am willing to take up the office of First Minister. My election to the post of First Minister demonstrates the change that's happening on this island.
Catholics and Protestants on different sides, now facing the same threat.
If we both contract COVID-19 and end up in hospital, religion's nothing.
People here are adept at finding hope amid adversity. That's the spirit of a place that punches way above its weight. We help you understand the world with us. A toxic blue-green algae now poisoning Lough Neagh. It's breaking your heart what has happened here.
It is.
This is a vital resource, a national treasure, now fighting for its very life. They are effectively surrounded by Northern Ireland, and that makes this the most unlikely of international frontiers.
If there's a hard border, I think it'll cripple the country.
Winter is coming. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record. Sky News, the full story first.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Sky News, the full story first.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people.
Welcome to the Politics Hub. A police force has apologised.
If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive. Now to the first discovery of a pharaoh's tomb in Egypt for more than 100 years. A joint Egyptian-British team found the original burial site of King Thutmose II near the city of Luxor. A small, still intact part of the ceiling confirmed it. It was painted blue with yellow stars, a feature only found in king's tombs. Joining me now is geoarchaeologist Dr. Judith Bunbury. Thank you very much for speaking to us. Just how significant is this find?
This is a very exciting discovery. We are quite surprised that Thutmose II seemed to have been taken out only a few years after he was put in, and so we think he's buried somewhere else, and we're still looking for that new burial place.
So tell us how you came upon the find. What were the first signs that you're onto something big?
Well, we've been studying the tombs of princesses and some royal retainers for about 12 years. And then one day we came across a square opening with steps going down, which is quite unusual for those small tombs. And then the team went on digging, and the steps went down and down and down until we found a really fairly large chamber, the one you showed with the star ceiling. And at that point, we realised that we didn't have a princess's tomb, we had a king's tomb. Very exciting.
And what was that moment like, that moment of discovery?
Well, it was all a very nail-biting sort of slow motion suspense. And even though we knew it was a king's tomb, we didn't know whose tomb it was until the workmen found some tiny pieces of a beautiful jar that had broken, and when they managed to piece the name back together, so that we went from Thutmose to Thutmose II and eventually worked out who it was. Yes, and there's the jar there to show those cartouches.
And this is the first time 17th century monarch, Egyptian monarch, had been discovered in this particular region. That's what was so unusual about this find.
Well, the tomb of Thutmose, or the burial place of Thutmose II, has not been known at all. And in fact, his grave goods have never been discovered either. So this is one of the kings that had not been previously excavated. quite a few pharaohs had been found in antiquity and the remains taken out. But in this case, it seems to still must be somewhere untouched.
And so you were saying that you still have to find the second burial place?
Well, that's right. So the rocks you can see falling away there are us trying to remove the pile of rocks over where we think it was moved to. But it's very painstaking work, as you can see.
And what did you actually recover from the site?
So apart from the inscription on the ceiling, there was also a wall painting of part of the Book of the Dead, which is like a tour guide to the afterlife to make sure that the pharaohs can find their way. And again, that's very unusual, except in royal burials. So we found that, but it all collapsed and was in pieces. So the team are doing a digital reconstruction, piecing it back together. They take photographs of every piece and then reconstruct it. So that's one thing. And then we found a broken alabaster duck jar and the other larger jar with the names on it of the king. But none of the other finds have been discovered yet, the grave goods. And so we're very excited to think that we might yet find those.
Still mystery ahead. And from what you found and what you've seen, what have you learnt that you didn't know before about the burial system for pharaohs of that time?
Well, many of the kings' tombs have been found on the other side of the mountain in the Valley of the Kings, and this side of the mountain was much more prevalently women and, as I said, royal retainers. So this is the first time one of the pharaohs has been found that far west. So that's been quite a surprising discovery. We need to wait to find more things to really know more about his life. He died relatively young, and then his wife Hatshepsut took over as the king after he died and co-regent with her nephew, Tutmosis III.
I'm not sure if you mentioned, but what was the reason for the pharaoh being moved from the first burial site?
Well, that was a big surprise when we excavated. We found lots of flood debris and the water had made much of the tomb collapse. So the evidence seems to be that it was very wet there. And of course, this is part of the Sahara Desert now. It's not wet normally. And so one of the surprises is that we may have had much wetter landscape in the New Kingdom when Tutmosis II was alive. And perhaps that explains why people were out in the desert. The texts talk of them being beautiful places. And it seems that they were probably much nicer and people were travelling out into the desert much further, more like a safari park than the arid desert it is now.
And I guess I don't have to ask what your future challenge will be, possibly locating that second burial site.
Keep moving these rocks.
Thank you so much for speaking to us, Dr. Judith Bunbury. Thank you. At the end of the last Bond movie, 007 appeared to have come to a sticky end, his future surrounded by uncertainty. Well, today, the same is true of his franchise. His long-term producers, Michael G. Wilson and Barbara Broccoli, are stepping back from the movie's creative process, handing the franchise over to Amazon MGM Studios. So what will happen to one of cinema's best-known characters? Our arts and entertainment correspondent, Katie Spencer, reports.
From Roger Moore to Timothy Dalton, Pierce Brosnan through to Daniel Craig. As long-time producers and custodians of James Bond, up until now, Michael Wilson and Barbara Broccoli have not only had the final say over who plays the spy, but also the stories we've seen on screen. But now, in a dramatic plot twist, comes a surprise announcement that the pair are stepping back, handing over creative control to Amazon.
Having problems keeping it up, Q?
In 2022, when Amazon acquired the studio's MGM, that included its Bond back catalogue. The streaming service saying it's honoured to usher in the next phase.
Amazon had creative control. They know people love Bond, and they want to give people Bond things, not just in the film sense, but in every sense, with spin-offs galore and whatnot, which could be catastrophic. I hope they don't go down that route.
Barbara Broccoli, who's always been fiercely protective over her father's franchise, explaining, "My life has been dedicated to maintaining and building upon the extraordinary legacy that was handed to Michael and me by our father, producer Cubby Broccoli. With the conclusion of No Time to Die and Michael retiring from the films, I feel it is time to focus on my other projects." At Pinewood Studios, home to the 007 soundstage, this should open the door to production finally getting underway on a long-awaited new film. Of course, it won't be Daniel Craig throwing himself around inside of here, since he walked away from the lucrative franchise after No Time to Die. But it's highly likely that all this behind-the-scenes wrangling is why a new Bond, whoever that may be, has yet to be named. Of course, Amazon taking charge of the reins could also potentially mean spin-off TV shows for the streaming service. Something which Broccoli wouldn't be drawn on when I spoke to her about the Amazon deal in 2021. Does that mean that we might see a sort of spin-off TV show? Or...
We have not wanted to do spin-offs, so I think that's our position. They certainly have told us that that the films will be theatrical films in the future, and we'll see what happens.
Amazon has already had a Bond reality show. Now with 007 under new management, could the new reality be more of this to come? All this uncertainty, enough to leave any fan a little shaken and a little stirred. Katie Spencer, Sky News.
Just want to bring you an update now on that breaking news story that we brought you, where police were saying there have been a series of explosions on buses from 5 timed explosives. This is in an area near to Tel Aviv. We're hearing now that the Israeli military says it's intensified anti-terror activity to continue in the West Bank following those explosions. More on that in News at 10.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.